Chapter 1. The Man Who Never Existed. In the heart of Monaco, where yachts shimmer beneath the sun and champagne is poured like water, a man wandered through the salons of high society like a ghost with the face of an angel. His name was Dante Ferraz, at least, for that particular month. He wore a petrol blue tailored suit, his dark hair slicked back to perfection, a Swiss watch on his wrist, and a smile as precise as a scalpel. No surveillance camera knew his real name, no bank account connected him to a fixed address. He was a delicate construction of lies, a house of cards built with a surgeon's precision. That evening, he moved confidently through the Hotel de Paris casino, greeting counts, magnates, and princesses with the ease of someone born into wealth. But there was no inheritance in his past, only silence and absence. He had learned early on that his survival depended on his ability to create versions of himself that perfectly matched the dreams of others. And now, more than ever, he fit in. At that moment, he was Raphael de Villeneuve, a supposed Franco-Brazilian heir to a fictional vineyard empire in Bordeaux. That name alone opened the gates of paradise once more. At the roulette table, Dante wasn't betting money. He was betting something more valuable: trust. By offering rare wines for tasting, promising partnerships in non-existent estates, and dropping hints about friendships with Swiss bankers, he made the rich feel special. And when they believed they had won him over, that was precisely when he brought them down. That week, his target was a Russian diamond tycoon, known for his arrogance and paranoia. Dante had studied him for months. He knew his daughter's name, his wine preferences, the type of security he hired. He had orchestrated casual encounters with the billionaire's colleagues at discreet dinners. He had bumped into him at a polo match in Windsor. He created such a perfect network of coincidences that the magnate finally invited him for a private meeting. That was the signal. The trap had been set. On the tycoon's yacht overlooking the port, Dante presented a purchase contract for a supposed gem mine in Angola. Everything looked legitimate. Stamped documents, real names interwoven with fabricated ones, even a phone number leading to a fake attorney, another actor in his temporary crew. The tycoon took the bait. He transferred 4.3 million euros as an advance. Dante vanished the next day. He flew to Marrakesh under another name, changed passports 3 times, and appeared days later in Paris as a Swiss philanthropist named Mathis Keller, freshly returned from the Himalayas. But there was no peace in his movements, only the intoxication of the game. Each successful con was a shot of adrenaline that kept him alive. More than the money, it was the control that thrilled him. To mold the world into his own narrative, to make the powerful believe in carefully carved illusions, that was his true addiction. Even while celebrating with celebrities in a penthouse on Avenue Montaigne, he was already preparing his next persona. The targets were endless. He didn't need to chase them, they came to him, desperate for connections with men like Mathis, Raphael, or Augusto. The names changed, but the gaze remained the same, a sharp glint that hid the scars of a childhood no one knew. Dante lived in an eternal present, where the past was a disposable burden and the future a fiction always rewritten. But the present had its cost. That night, while admiring the Eiffel Tower from his hotel balcony, a discreet notification lit up his phone. It was just a message from an unknown number with a single line: "You made a mistake." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The chill down his spine was immediate, as if an invisible hand had touched him in the shadows. Perfection had been broken. And when perfection breaks, there is no fixing it, only the fall. Hook for the next chapter. As Dante dons a new identity, he tries to understand who spotted his flaw and how it could compromise his freedom. But in investigating the source of the message, he discovers this isn't just another con. Someone from the past has returned, and they know all his tricks. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Mirror. The phone remained silent after the message. No further notifications, no clues to its source. Just that line lingering on the screen like invisible poison: "You made a mistake." Dante knew the power of fear, He had wielded it himself against countless victims. He understood how a vague threat could erode even the most solid minds. But what disturbed him wasn't the threat itself. It was the certainty that something had escaped his control. And Dante didn't make mistakes. Never. At dawn, he left Paris before the city fully woke. Instead of following the planned route, where he would assume the role of a Venetian art collector at a private fair in Belgium, he went into retreat. He needed to trace the error, analyze his recent moves, and understand where the illusion had cracked. He took shelter in a secure apartment in Milan, hidden among design studios and boutique galleries, a place no one would expect to find a master of deception. Within its concrete walls, surrounded by forged paintings and cutting-edge tech, Dante activated his personal arsenal. Encrypted computers, decoy cameras, and cold-stored digital identities. He reviewed footage from the yacht, audio from his meetings with the Russian tycoon, every signature, every interaction. Everything was flawless. Until he spotted a tiny, almost invisible detail. One of the fake contracts had been resent to him by a contact in Panama before the meeting. In the rush, he had used the older version, a document that included a standard digital signature he had used in a previous con 2 years earlier in Geneva. A minor coordination error. Minimal, but fatal. The same signature had once been linked to an anonymous report from an art gallery investigated for money laundering. From there, anyone with access to international data could make a connection. A well-trained tracker would have seen it. That's when he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. For the first time in years, he was no longer the author of the narrative, but a character being hunted. Determined to uncover the source of the message, Dante reached out to an old contact, a high-level hacker who went by the alias Liz. She owed him a favor. For a generous payment, she traced the message to an anonymous server, masked through multiple IP chains, with a final ping from Bogota. A familiar pattern. An old, painful pattern. There was only one person who used that digital footprint, Miguel Navarro. Years earlier, in Lisbon, Miguel had been Dante's partner. Calculated, cold, a silent shadow everyone suspected but no one ever caught. They had pulled off million-dollar jobs together until a botched operation in Dubai ended with betrayal. Miguel had been arrested. Dante escaped. Since then, Miguel had vanished, but now it seemed he had returned, and with a thirst for revenge. More than that, Miguel had changed. Rumors said that after his arrest, he was recruited by an international agency specializing in tracking digital criminals. Dante never confirmed it. But if it was true, then the message made perfect sense. It wasn't just a threat. It was a signal. The game had begun, and this time, he was on the wrong side of the board. In the following weeks, Dante entered full containment mode. He canceled new operations, deactivated identities and accounts, altered his routines obsessively. He slept little, with weapons hidden beneath cushions, avoided luxurious places, and used only encrypted channels. Yet beneath the surface of control, frustration festered. For the first time, he was at a disadvantage, not knowing who he truly faced, nor how close they had gotten. Then, on a sultry evening, in a discreet Milanese bar hidden behind an art gallery, he saw her. Lorena Vidal, the daughter of the Russian tycoon he had conned weeks earlier. She sat in a reserved corner, flanked by 2 discreet bodyguards. Their eyes met for what felt like an eternity. There was no hatred in her gaze, just curiosity, as if she had come not to accuse, but to understand. Dante didn't know whether it was a coincidence or if she had found him. But that encounter reopened a dangerous door, a new possibility of manipulation, of control. And even while on the run, the temptation to reclaim the narrative was impossible to resist. He wouldn't resist for long. Hook for the next chapter. Dante decides to get closer to Lorena, unsure whether she's acting of her own accord or being used as bait by Miguel. Meanwhile, his latest identity begins to appear on the dark web, putting him in greater danger than ever before. Chapter 3. The First Fall. Lisbon glowed under the setting sun, with its warm-colored facades and steep cobbled alleys hiding stories long buried. But for Dante, the city had become a labyrinth of ghosts. Every street whispered memories. Every corner echoed with fragments of a time when he and Miguel laughed at the powerful while manipulating their pride with surgical finesse. But that time was long dead, and from its grave had risen a silent predator. After discovering the envelope hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the abandoned warehouse, Dante knew he was being led. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap designed with time and patience. The coordinates inside guided him to the riverfront, where an old port building had been transformed into a cultural space. It had the kind of charm he recognized instantly, bohemian enough to appear harmless, refined enough to attract the elite. Inside, an interactive exhibition projected fragmented images of financial crimes across the world. Videos, audio, and real documents merged into conceptual art installations. But one projection stood out. A grainy video showed a man partially obscured in shadow. Dante recognized the gait, the hand twitch, the subtle tension in the posture. Miguel. The image was part of the exhibit. A veiled insult. Miguel was turning the hunt into art, using the gallery walls to stage his moves. Dante realized Miguel didn't just want to catch him, he wanted to dismantle him in full view. Back at the Lisbon apartment, Dante reactivated dormant contacts. One of them, Ernesto Malheiros, was a grizzled art restorer who once cleaned stolen paintings for Dante and Miguel. Now older and more dependent on wine than memory, Ernesto was reluctant to speak. But after a sizable bribe, he confessed a crucial truth. Miguel was not acting alone. One name had been circulating quietly: Véronique Dumas. The French art collector had once been one of Dante's most discreet victims. He'd sold her a forged Caravaggio with impeccable documentation, pocketing millions. She never filed a complaint. She simply vanished. And now she had resurfaced, wealthy, influential, and hungry for revenge. The perfect partner for Miguel, someone who understood Dante's mind and had the resources to crush him. With this new piece on the board, the web around Dante grew tighter. Miguel brought skill, Véronique, power, and Lorena remained an enigma, perhaps a pawn, perhaps a player of her own, or worse, someone drawn to him willingly. Under pressure, Dante made a mistake. He visited an old workshop once used to create fake documents. The location had supposedly been abandoned. But inside, signs of surveillance were unmistakable. Hidden cameras, motion sensors, subtle traces of recent activity. Behind one wall panel, he found a tiny metallic device. A tracker. He left immediately, but it was too late. There were no more safe houses. His havens had been compromised. His old routes mapped. Desperate, he activated a protocol he had never dared use before, the final scenario. A plan designed to erase him completely, discarding every identity. But to do so, he would have to sever all ties, even to Lorena. And that's when he hesitated. She had followed him to Lisbon, not physically, but through subtle traces. Hotel records, camera captures, her silhouette appearing along the same streets he walked. In one photo, she stood by the river, eyes lost in the horizon, as if waiting for something. Or someone. The hesitation was brief, but costly. That same night, a cyber attack hit his network. Passwords, codes, accounts, everything was compromised. A wave of digital fire consumed the systems he had spent years constructing. It wasn't just an attack. It was erasure. And once again, a message appeared. You made a second mistake. Hook for the next chapter. With no identities left and every safe house compromised, Dante must make a brutal choice: disappear for good or confront Miguel and Véronique head-on. But before he vanishes, he decides to do something unexpected: to find Lorena. Not as a con artist, but as a man. Chapter 4. echoes of the hunt. The wind sweeping through Sintra that morning was damp and heavy, as though it carried more than just cold. Secrets, perhaps, or warnings murmured through the pine trees that surrounded the chalet. Dante stared at the note Lorena had left, a handwritten IP address on a small piece of paper. It wasn't just a clue, it was an invitation. Or a trap. For years, he had trained himself to see patterns, to identify lies, to anticipate moves. But now, everything seemed off-script. His hideouts had been exposed. His digital architecture had collapsed. And the only person who had remained close, who had seemed genuine, had vanished without explanation. But before he made any decisions, Dante activated a deeply buried failsafe, a hidden case beneath a tree root in the chalet's backyard. Inside, sealed in a waterproof container, was one of his final backups: encrypted chips, miniature gold bars, and a single recording. This was his contingency plan. If he didn't survive the next few days, someone could find it. Or perhaps no one would. That too would be part of the story. With the IP address in hand, he used one of the last untracked devices he had left. The signal led to a secluded estate outside Lyon, France. A chateau that, according to public records, housed a foundation for victims of cybercrimes. But Dante knew better. There were no victims there, only predators with polished masks. He flew under a makeshift identity, walked the forest trails around the chateau at sunrise, feeling the weight of inevitability press on his shoulders. He knew he wouldn't be able to sneak in undetected, and he didn't try. For the first time, he wanted to be seen. At the gate, the cameras recognized him. The doors opened, and there she was, Veronique Dumas. Time hadn't dulled her sharpness. Her silver hair was pulled back with precise elegance, her posture poised, her eyes as cold and penetrating as ever. She greeted him with a smile that didn't welcome, it conquered. She led him through echoing halls until they reached a vast, minimalist room with tall windows and muted furniture. There, waiting, was Miguel Navarro, seated calmly, as though this reunion were nothing more than a postponed appointment. Dante didn't speak. Miguel did. His voice was even, his tone dispassionate. He explained that he had never been arrested in Dubai. He had been recruited. The details of their botched operation were sold to an agency eager to capture someone even more valuable: Dante. The arrest was staged. Since then, he had worked in the shadows, monitoring his former partner's every move, laying a net with patience and precision. Veronique, on the other hand, wasn't there for justice. She was there for erasure. She didn't want Dante in prison. She wanted him forgotten. She wanted to dismantle his legend, his influence, his footprint, as though he had never existed. Together, Miguel and Veronique were a perfect machine: strategy and funding, vengeance and precision. And Dante, once untouchable, was now their final project. Then Lorena appeared. She stepped into the room quietly, dressed simply, but with the same unwavering gaze. She didn't approach, didn't speak. Miguel explained that she had come to them, that she had offered help, that she had provided information in exchange for answers. Answers about her father's secrets, about the shadowy dealings that Dante had unknowingly exposed. Dante studied her. Was it betrayal? Strategy? Survival? Or something else entirely? Veronique didn't wait. She declared that the moment of choice had arrived. Dante had two options: assume a new identity crafted by them, under their terms. A silent life, controlled but spared. Refuse, and be destroyed. His history exposed. His allies warned. His myth dismantled. Dante asked for one night. Veronique denied him. Miguel, however, allowed it, saying that a man who had taught him deception deserved at least a final, dignified choice. That night, alone in a room as cold as a cell, Dante accessed the backup chip. Among the files was something he had never used, a recording of Miguel, captured during one of their first jobs. In it, Miguel confessed that the betrayal in Dubai wasn't Dante's doing, that he had used his partner's name as cover for a deeper deception, one he had kept secret until now. Dante realized he wasn't just cornered, he had a weapon. By morning, he had made his decision. Hook for the next chapter. Dante confronts Miguel and Veronique with a recording that could destroy their empire. But the game changes again, and for the first time, he places his fate in someone else's hands, Lorena's. Chapter 5, Lines That Cross. The sky over Lisbon rose in pale shades of gold and gray, as if the city itself hesitated to wake. But Dante had been awake for hours. He stared into the dusty mirror of an old hotel room, not as a fugitive, but as someone who barely recognized the man looking back. Fatigue crept into the fine lines around his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that no luxury could erase. Miguel's last message echoed in his mind, "You made a second mistake." It wasn't just a warning, it was a cruel reminder that, for all his preparation, someone still knew him too well. And that person was already 2 steps ahead. But that day, Dante didn't want to chase shadows. He wanted clarity. Real or not. He needed something that would steady his balance, even if only for a moment. So he did the unthinkable. He looked for Lorena. Not as Raphael, not as Mathis, not as any of his many faces. He looked for her as Dante Ferraz, the closest thing to a real name he had. He found her in Lisbon's Principe Real District, staying at a discreet, elegant hotel. He watched from a distance for hours. She moved through bookstores, bought flowers, and sat quietly at a cafe overlooking the city. Nothing about her suggested vengeance. Only a quiet kind of waiting, as if she knew he would come. When he finally approached, there was no surprise. She raised her eyes from the book she was reading and met his gaze as if he were a puzzle piece finally snapping into place. Dante sat across from her, unmasked. He spoke little. There were no apologies, no lies. Only glances heavy with unspoken truths. Lorena, for her part, offered something unexpected. She had known all along. The moment he introduced himself as Raphael de Villeneuve, she knew. Her father never did business without vetting his partners, and Raphael had appeared from nowhere. But she had let the game play out of curiosity, out of a need to understand, or something more difficult to name. She said she hadn't come to Lisbon for revenge. Her father could answer for his own mistakes. She came to find answers. To understand how someone like Dante could exist, someone so skilled at pretending, it became his only reality. His ability to lie didn't anger her. It frightened her, because she saw in him a reflection of herself, someone raised to hide every emotion. And it was then that Dante made his third mistake. He trusted her. He invited Lorena to an old hideout in the hills of Sintra, a stone chalet buried in pine trees, used in the past for quiet negotiations and untraceable transfers. He believed Miguel didn't know it existed. They spent the day in silence. Lorena wandered the rooms like a guest exploring someone else's past. Dante reviewed files, maps, banking trails, movement logs. The hunt was no longer about money or escape. It was a chess match with lives on the line. When the sun went down and the fire filled the room with flickering light, Dante let down the last of his defenses. He told her about the orphanages, the faceless adolescents, the discovery that a well-crafted lie was a universal key. How survival became addiction. Lorena didn't interrupt. She simply listened. But that night, he woke to a noise. The chalet's door was ajar, wind curling through the crack like a whisper. Lorena was gone. On the table, a note. No signature. No explanation. Just a number, 14.197.53.2. An IP address. Dante recognized it immediately. It was a server used by Veronique Dumas. Lorena had left, and left a trail. Had she been manipulated? Had she joined their side? Or was this her way of warning him? The questions struck like knives. But so did the certainty. The walls were closing in. The next morning, drones flew over the property. The GPS signal, which he thought had been disabled, had been reactivated. His final refuge had been compromised. And in that moment, for the first time, Dante ran without knowing where. Hook for the next chapter. With all his hideouts exposed and emotional ties now threats, Dante faces a brutal decision: vanish forever or confront his past head-on. But before he disappears, one final message, a hidden recording, changes everything. Chapter 6. The Face Behind the Mask. The chateau stood still under the French morning mist. A place that exuded silence as a weapon, elegant, vast, and sterile. From the outside, it looked like a philanthropic sanctuary, a refuge for noble causes. But inside, every corridor echoed with calculations. Dante had arrived the day before, walking through the gates without resistance. The cameras had recognized his face. The guards hadn't moved. The invitation had been implied from the start. He was no longer the predator. The interior of the chateau was minimalist, cold, and clinical, like the mind of the woman who now waited for him. Veronique Dumas. Time had not dulled her presence. Her silver hair was perfectly tied, her back straight, her gaze still cutting through flesh and facade. She welcomed him not with a greeting, but with the smile of someone who believes she's already won. They crossed the marble hallways until reaching a tall room bathed in pale light. There, sitting at a sleek table, was Miguel Navarro. Older, still, serene. Dante didn't speak. Miguel did. With that same tone Dante remembered from their early days. Calm, sharp, merciless. He explained everything. He had never been arrested in Dubai. The capture had been staged. He was recruited, offered a choice: disappear or serve. He chose to serve, not justice, but a new order. One where people like Dante were hunted, dissected, and erased. Veronique didn't care about justice. She didn't want Dante in a cell. She wanted him obliterated. Reputation, legacy, memory. She wanted him to vanish from history. Together, Miguel and Veronique had built something bigger than revenge. They had turned Dante into a final project, a test of control, a ghost to be caged. And then, Lorena appeared. She entered silently, worn from the inside, but calm. She didn't approach Dante, didn't defend him. Miguel explained, she had come willingly. She had helped them, traded data in exchange for answers about her father, about his secret dealings, the shell companies, the hidden accounts. All of it uncovered through Dante's scams. She hadn't come to betray. She had come to understand. But that understanding had a price. Veronique made it clear. Dante had one choice. Option 1. He would be given a new identity. Everything arranged. A small life, under their control, monitored, but safe. Option 2. He would be ruined. His digital footprint would be exposed. His past clients would be notified. His legend would die screaming. He asked for one night. Veronique denied him. Miguel granted it. That night, in a room colder than any cell, Dante unlocked one of the chips hidden in his coat. Among the files was a forgotten weapon, a recording. Miguel's voice, recorded years ago, as the two celebrated a successful con. In it, Miguel confessed, he had betrayed Dante first. In Dubai, he had used Dante's name to protect himself, framed him, lied, and kept the truth as currency. Dante now held that currency. In the morning, everything changed. Hook for the next chapter. With the recording in hand, Dante confronts Miguel and Veronique in front of their elite network. But instead of taking revenge, He places the final move in someone else's hands, Lorena's. Chapter 7. The Final Con. The following morning, the chateau was quieter than ever. Its immaculate halls, manicured gardens, and sunlit courtyards all radiated control. But beneath that stillness, the walls were ready to collapse. Dante awoke before sunrise, seated by the window, the small device in his hand. The recording of Miguel, a confession buried for years, now felt like a loaded weapon. A truth too sharp to hold for long. Miguel had lied. Miguel had betrayed. And Veronique had built her empire on that deception. All they needed to fall was exposure. The question was how and when. That morning, as Veronique prepared to host a private gathering of diplomats, investors, and philanthropic allies, Dante initiated his first move. He activated a deep protocol embedded in one of his hidden drives, a timed release. If he didn't cancel it within 24 hours, the full recording would be sent to 3 independent media outlets and an encrypted leak platform. The moment it went live, names, dates, accounts, everything would become public. It was his dead man switch. Then he went looking for Lorena. He found her walking among the vines behind the chateau, alone. She didn't seem surprised to see him. He said nothing, just handed her the device. Explained, calmly, that he had proof, that he could destroy Miguel, that he could bring everything down. But he didn't want to make that decision alone. He asked her why she had returned, why she had approached Miguel, why she had helped. She told him the truth. She had never trusted Miguel, never believed in Veronique's mission. But she had needed answers about her father's crimes, about the dirty legacy he left behind. And Dante, without knowing, had been the one to open those doors. She infiltrated the network, using her own last name as bait. She thought she could control it. She was wrong. Now it was all too far gone. Dante nodded. He understood. Then he asked her for one last thing. Decide what happens to the truth. That afternoon, while Veronique presented her foundation's next big venture to a circle of European elites, Dante entered the grand hall without invitation. He stood before them all, calm and unarmed. He showed the edited version of the recording, just enough to shake the ground. Miguel tried to downplay it, to paint Dante as a manipulator. But Veronique knew better. She saw the storm rising. And then Dante made his second move. He revealed the full scope of the timer. If anything happened to him, anything, the full recording would go live. There would be no way to stop it. The air went cold. Veronique offered him an exit. Money, silence, new papers. In exchange, he would delete the file and disappear. Dante refused. Instead, he turned to Lorena, who had just entered the room. In front of everyone, he handed her the control. You choose. Lorena looked at him, then at Veronique, then at Miguel, and walked out without saying a word. The meeting ended in chaos. Quiet, expensive chaos. No more speeches. No more deals. That night, the chateau emptied. No parties. No celebrations. Just silent cars disappearing into the trees. And Dante vanished with them. Before leaving, he left one final message in the chateau system, scheduled to display the next morning. Con men build castles. But even castles have ghosts. Hook for the final chapter. Days later, the full recording leaks. Veronique vanishes. Miguel becomes the hunted. And in a quiet village by the sea, Dante begins a new life, until the past finds him again. Chapter 8. The Man Who Almost Was. International headlines erupted like wildfires. The recording was leaked in full. Not just the voice of Miguel Navarro, but the accompanying documents, transaction records, and communications between the so-called foundation and financial entities across Europe. In less than 72 hours, It became the largest exposure of elite corruption since the Panama Papers. Veronique Dumas vanished. Her properties were seized. Her name scrubbed from several boards. Governments cut ties with her network. Her empire didn't fall, it evaporated. Miguel Navarro became the hunted. Interpol listed him. Governments that once protected him now feared what else he might reveal. He was seen last boarding a flight to Morocco. After that, silence. And Dante Ferraz? Dante disappeared, not into darkness, but into something softer. Something quieter. 3 months later, in a small coastal village in southern Italy, a man known only as Luca opened a modest bookstore cafe. He wore plain clothes, carried no watch, and let his hair grow out slightly wild. He spoke fluent Italian, had no past, and told no stories. He didn't need to. The cafe was peaceful. Worn wood, shelves full of old books, the scent of espresso and salt air. Locals came to read, talk, sit in silence. Dante, or Luca, served them all with polite nods and quiet smiles. For the first time in years, he existed without deception. Until one cloudy afternoon, when the doorbell chimed softly, and she walked in. Lorena. No expensive dress, no guarded posture. She looked older in the way grief and freedom make people older. Deeper, not broken. She didn't speak at first. Just walked to a shelf where a worn copy of the Count of Monte Cristo rested. She touched the spine gently, then turned to him. He poured her a coffee without asking. They sat outside, under a wooden awning, facing the sea. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared. She told him that she had sent the recording herself. That it felt like a release, not revenge, but closure. She said Miguel was still out there, probably rebuilding something. But this time, the world was watching. He asked why she had come. She said she had spent her whole life surrounded by men who ran from themselves. And she wanted to see if he still was. That night, she didn't leave. The next morning, she helped open the cafe. She never said she'd stay forever. He never asked her to. But from that day on, they began building something neither had ever known, a quiet life. Still, beneath the floorboards, in a sealed box, were passports, gold, encrypted chips. A silent contingency. Because ghosts never truly vanish. They just learn how to wear better masks. End of story.